For me, CSW was a revelation on how we negotiate for women's rights. So if you are an idealist, it can be quite confronting because it dawns pretty soon that any progressive language that can substantially impact the realization of the empowerment of women and girls' human rights will rarely find consensus. But if, like me, you're a pragmatist, you'll just about survive if you keep telling yourself that the only way to reach the goal of gender equality is to keep chipping away at the foundations of inequality. So it was a roller coaster ride. I mean, there were times when I was really angry and frustrated that we still have to negotiate to secure fundamental human rights and freedoms for all women and girls. At other times, I just sat there incredulous and amused at the abject lack of knowledge amongst those negotiating on the rights for all women and girls. So I actually kept track of what I called my 20 quotable quotes. One of them was from one delegate, and I won't say which country, who said, well, we're talking about economic empowerment. What does violence against women have to do with that? At which point they did get up and leave the room because I was liable to throw something at them. And then there were times when I was really moved by the passion and sophisticated articulation of why women and girls are central to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And there was hope, there was a lot of hope, and that came from the Youth Forum that Hannah talked to you about. It was wonderful to see women not just knocking on the door, but actually opening the door and walking in and addressing the opening session of CSW for the first time. So now I'll talk about overall what Sarah and I felt about CSW. We think it's a really important experience for CSOs to be involved in, given that spaces for direct CSO engagements in key agenda setting processes are shrinking. So it's really commendable that the Australian government resources to CSO delegates to be part of the official delegation. We are one of the few countries that does that, and I think we really need to acknowledge the effort that goes into doing that. I think equally important, participation in high-level negotiations like CSW helps local and national CSO make vital links between what are perceived as international issues versus local issues. And this, I think, is really important in the wake of the Sustainable Development Goals, which, unlike their predecessor, the Millennium Goals, is a truly global agenda. What also became very apparent to Sarah and me is that the nature and the role of CSW has undergone a shift. And in many ways, this has given CSW a new lease of life. If you look at the agreed conclusions, CSW on one hand now has a central role to play in the follow-up and review of the SDGs on the whole and not just Goal 5. And on the other, it has an ongoing role in terms of reviewing the Beijing Platform for Action. CSO participation also has undergone a change at CSW this year, and we've seen much more engagement from the private sector, from multi-faith organizations, and from trade unions. The Youth Forum, which Hannah spoke about, was really a resounding success. And while we were unsuccessful in institutionalizing their participation as a formal part of CSW, there was a paragraph in the agreed conclusions that got deleted in the final set of negotiations. There really is no doubt that youth organizations are pushing at the door with meaningful contributions and discussions around sustainable development goals. And if you read their youth statement, it's very, very clearly reflected they very, very clearly reflect the kinds of stands that the Youth Forum are taking, and this might actually be what we need to progress some of that language within CSW. What was our role? The CSO delegates' role, well, we had many discussions with the Office for Women on what we would be doing, and we saw our role twofold. So before the start of CSW, the CSO delegates' role is to try and create a platform where we could provide inputs into the zero draft of the agreed conclusions. We kept an eye on what many of the international networks that Sarah and I are part of were saying about CSW, what issues they were pushing. During the 2 weeks in New York, our role became keeping the Australian civil society delegation really informed about what was happening behind closed doors, because we had a look in, we could sit in on the negotiations as part of the official delegation. We tried to create a sense of community and identity where people could share information about the different events they were attending. They were telling us about what were the agendas that were being pushed by some of the other delegations, which we could then take to ours and say, well, these are our like-minded organizations. We would sit in on the opening sessions and support the delegation. For example, we kept track of every time a delegation in its opening country statement mentioned NHRI and what was the context. So we could pass that on to Alison and her mob, so she could, if need be, she knew who to get in touch with to say, hang on a sec, this is what your country statement said. And we also supported the delegation in terms of finding progressive language or progressing a certain agenda. And for us, because we did not have an Aboriginal woman on the delegation, I think we really tried as far as possible to closely link in with Vicky to get her inputs, especially when we saw that there was going to be a paragraph on Indigenous women in the agreed conclusions. Well, now that CSW is over, what did we gain? I think some of the challenges Alison has already mentioned. But for us, I think it was wonderful to see a standalone paragraph on Indigenous and rural women. 2 paragraphs, one on Indigenous women, one on rural women. We were really glad to see we managed to get the language on recognition that there are multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination that are faced by women, by Indigenous women and women with disabilities. We actually got a paragraph in on climate change. And what was great about that paragraph, I think, is that doesn't see women as victims, but as agents of climate change adaptation, which I think is really important because there tends to be it's easier to see us as victims who need to be protected as opposed to agents of change. And having that language around agents of change for us was very important. The range of CSO organizations' participation that was recognized was also fantastic. We actually got words like feministing, and I almost fell off my chair because I was like, oh my God. Really strong language around women's human rights defenders, which I think was very positive. There was quite a bit of discussion before that got in. There were some times where things got in because I don't really think people understood what was going on, and that was the paragraph around pink tax. I don't know how that got up. I mean, I don't think people realize that they'd actually fundamentally have to look at how taxation works in their countries. So there was interesting, amusing things that happened around how something slipped under the radar. What else? I think the one other really positive thing for us was the paragraph around engaging men. And the only reason I say it was encouraging was because it did not talk about engaging men for the sake of engaging men. The use of the words like power and unequal power and unequal distribution of unpaid care work, that kind of language, I think, puts a very different spin on how we look at how we engage with men and which men's groups we engage with. We maintained a strong focus, I think, on eliminating all forms of violence against women and the central role that eliminating violence plays in the achievement of the SDGs. The language around women's economic empowerment was quite forward-looking. The references to disproportionate unpaid care work, which acts as a barrier, references to full employment, equal pay for equal work or work of equal value, I think gives us very strong hooks into what we can do here in Australia. Just wanted to end with we have a whole list of recommendations that we are making to the Office for Women on how we prepare for CSW, and Alison, you really stole our idea, I must say, because one of the ideas that Sarah and I are putting forward is that we really need to have a unity of effort. So how do we create a national platform where organizations that are working both locally as well as internationally engage in UN processes like CSW? I think, and this is particularly important with the Sustainable Development Goals. We could easily say that the Millennium Development Goal was an aid agenda. We can't say that the Sustainable Development Goal is only an aid agenda. Right? It applies to all countries, not just developing countries. And so how do we make those links between the national and the international, and how do we actually get our voices heard? Because I think the National Women's Alliances fly under the radar. They do such wonderful work, but not many people know about them. Not many people know how to engage with them. And so our comments to Office for Women and our recommendations have been around creating a platform that will allow more and more CSOs to engage in this space. Thank you.